Hello everyone, Bonzet over here. Once again, just want to take this opportunity and just thanks Liberty to make this show possible so you can enjoy it at your home. And then if you've got a smart device, smartphone, iPad, please go and download the Tenfold education app. Lots of good information over there that will help you with your preparation for your exams. And then you can also join us on YouTube and just go and look at Add Mindset Learn. Once again, just revising some of the topics that we've discussed on live sessions over here. Now, today we're going to have a look at paper 2 that the matrics of 2025 are writing tomorrow. And we're going to focus on settlement geography and economic geography. Now, I've chosen questions that's going to be very similar, not obviously the exact same questions, but very similar format that you will receive tomorrow. And it will help you to prepare for your exam tomorrow. Now let's get straight into it. We're going to start off with settlement geography. And if you look at the format, first couple of questions is going to be short answer concept-based questions. Now in this case, if you look at question 1.1, choose a term or concept from column B that matches with the statement from column A. And as we continue, I'll explain some of these concepts to you. If we look at question 1.1, the grouping of people building structures and communication networks that function as a unit, that is known as a settlement. Now, a settlement, simple definition for a settlement is where people live. Okay, you need people to be able to be recognized as a settlement. Now, obviously, when we look at this topic, we're going to look at the different types of settlements. We're going to look at the different patterns of settlements. And we're obviously going to distinguish between these different types of settlements. What activities causes these settlements to develop? Right, so if you look at the concept 1.1.1, the correct answer will be Z. If we have a look at question 1.1.2, a settlement is located high up, away from the threat of flooding. So when we look at flooding, obviously we think of water resources. Now, we distinguish between two different types of settlements, dry point settlements and wet point settlements. Now, in this case, for question 1.1.2, it will be a dry point settlement. And the easiest way to remember that is going to be the following, right? Think of it, if there's a risk of flooding, you want to stay dry. So you're going to be at a higher altitude because you don't want to be prone for the flooding when the water level increases. So that is known as a dry point settlement. Very easy to remember. Just think of it, you want to stay dry. So let's say, for instance, on a topographical map, right, you will see that the settlement will be far away from the floodplain, for example, and at a very high altitude to not be prone, especially with places that's prone for flooding. If we look at question 1.1.3, the piece of land where the settlement is found, that is known as Y. That's going to be the site of the settlement. Right, it's the exact piece of topography that what is there for necessity to form the settlement. Now, obviously, we need to look at water, fertile soil, right? That's the reason why the people tended to choose the exact area to go and settle and construct. If you look at question 1.1.4, a settlement where water is scarce and developed around a water source. Now this is basically vice versa from question 1.1.2. In this case, people live closer to the water source because it's a scarcity, right? Because they might need it. So in this case, it's going to be Y, it's going to be a wet point settlement. Now if you look at question 1.1.5, the shape of the settlement built along the river. Now this is an interesting one because I've just mentioned to you, we're going to distinguish between the different types of settlement and the different shapes of settlements. Now in this case, if you look at the river, it's usually a linear pattern. We can also add there a road, right? Depending how the settlement is shaped, right? In the case of a river, it's going to be a linear pattern. Now, a lot of times we have crossroad patterns as well. It's usually where a transport network crosses with a railway network, like the R, for example. It's a junction, right? So it gives it a different shape. But in the case of rivers and transport, it might be definitely in a linear pattern. Now, if you look at question 1.1.6, the exact location of a settlement in a physical environment is a situation. Now remember, very importantly, to distinguish between the site and the situation. Once again, this is vice versa for question 1.1.3. If you look at 1.1.3, the piece of land where the settlement is found is the site. The exact location of the settlement on the physical environment, right? What's around it, the topography, the type of soil is going to be the situation. Then lastly, when we're going to have a look at question 1.1.7, the function of rural settlements. Now, this is quite important, and I'm just going to write there. Now, if we look at rural settlements, I'm just going to write it over there. If you look at rural settlements, we mainly focus on primary activities. But when we look at urban settlements, we mainly focus on secondary and tertiary activities. Now, when we look at rural settlements, we say it's unifunctional. It mainly focuses on one specific activity. But when we look at urban settlements, it focuses on multifunctional and more than one activity. In this case, it might be secondary activities, right, and tertiary activities, service delivery, even quaternary activities. But when we look at our rural settlements, it's mainly where we have farming, fishing, forestry, and mining taking place. So it's unifunctional, right, and only focus on one primary activity. That's the difference between it. Now, if you look at question 1.7, the function of a rural settlement is going to be, the correct answer is going to be Z. It's going to be unifunctional. Whereas our urban settlements focus on more than one activity. So it might be manufacturing. If you look at Johannesburg, for example, right, it's the biggest industrial region in South Africa, the PWV. Right, multiple activities, service delivery, etc. Okay, let's move on to the next set of short questions. Now, once again, you need to choose the correct answer over here. The various options are provided as possible answers, so you choose the correct answer. Now, question 1.2.1, what do we call the movement of people from urban areas to rural areas? And the correct answer will be rural-urban migration. Now, let's just quickly delve a little bit more into this topic because it's quite an important topic. Now, especially we see it over time that more people move to urban areas. The simple reason why is because they're looking for job opportunities, right? Better standard of living, quality housing. Now, when we discussed this topic, we looked at the pull and push factors. Now, the question you need to ask yourself, what pulls people towards our urban areas? Why do people tend to move to big metropolitan areas like Johannesburg or Cape Town? Now, first and foremost is job opportunities, right? More employment opportunities. So I'm just going to write it over there. Right? Second of all, better service delivery. And we can also mention the bright lights, entertainment. Another highlight for pull factors will be tertiary education. You seldomly find that you find colleges and universities in small rural towns. So that's a big pull factor. But once again, what pushes people away from rural areas? Now, we looked at it in the previous question when we discussed the rural settlements. It mainly focuses on one type of activity. Now remember, when we look at the majority of our rural areas, if we look at push factors, right, it's mainly they might be experienced droughts, such as natural disasters, or it might be safety is a big concern in our rural settlements, and farms are getting mechanized. So eventually that will lead to less job opportunities for the people who work on the farm. So as this happens, what do we see? We see an aging population. We see lack of services, right? Schools close down. It might even lead to ghost towns, right? Because of the majority of the people moving away. Now, it's no point, school numbers are on decline. Obviously, we're talking about the multiplier effect over here. People move away. So that means shops, service delivery will be in decline. Now, what can we do in this situation? Right, to obviously promote small rural towns. We've seen many towns such as Clarence having festivals, right? Obviously try to promote the town, create recreational facilities in these towns, just to try and get people back to these rural communities. So that's the movement of people from urban areas to rural areas. Now, if we have a look at question 1.2.2, the process whereby increasing percentage of people live and work in urban rather than in rural areas is known as urbanization. Now, I'm going to go through these four concepts with you, right? So we're talking about the percentage of people that live and work in the urban areas. So it means it's an increase of people working in these areas. Now, when we look at the push and pull factors earlier, right, unfortunately, it's going to stretch demands on our urban settlements because it's going to put pressure on service and infrastructure because we've got a high influx of people joining these urban areas. And then obviously the population of this urban area is also increasing. Right? When we look at urban expansion, right, we focus over there on the physical area getting bigger, where the urban area is based, right? Urban growth is the number, and urban sprawl. Urban growth is the number of population that grows in it, and urban sprawl is when there's unplanned, right? Urban sprawl is unplanned. It's when the urban area physically gets bigger, but without planning that goes into conjunction with it. So our correct answer for 1.2.2 will be urbanization. Now let's just have a look at our next questions. Now this is just exactly what I've mentioned in the previous question, 1.2.4. What is the uncontrolled and formless growth of an urban area? And that's urban sprawl, like I've mentioned. Remember, a lot of planning takes place in urban settlements, right? We have town and city planners, right? We need to provide the people with infrastructure and service delivery. So because of this rural-urban migration, sometimes it becomes uncontrolled. The influx of people is just too huge over a very short period of time. And unfortunately, that's going to create pressure on our local municipalities, on our infrastructure and service delivery because of the magnitude of people that's moved over a short period of time to our urban settlements. Now remember, these people are moving towards our urban settlements looking for a better life, right? Job opportunities, better housing, better healthcare facilities, and tertiary education as an example. So eventually, it's going to lead to problems eventually in our urban areas because just too many people over a short period of time. So the correct answer for 1.2.4 will be C. Now, if you look at question 1.2.5, let's just quickly go back. The physical growth of an urban settlement, right, like we just mentioned, question 1.2.5, that will be D. It's the expansion of the urban area. Now, we've seen it a couple of times. Now, if you're from Gauteng area, like for instance, let's say, for instance, you're a tourist in the Gauteng area. I mean, just the vast development that took place between Johannesburg and Pretoria. Yes, you got Midrand and all these places. But if you bring a tourist, for instance, to Gauteng, he won't even know where did he leave Johannesburg and when does the district of Pretoria starts, because of urban expansion taking place over the last 2 decades. Right, so it's the physical area, the physical growth of the area, and that is known as urban expansion. Okay. Our next question. The disadvantage of urbanization for large cities are increased. Now, like I've mentioned, because of this pull and pull factors, they've given us quite a few options over there. Crime, employment, better opportunities and pollution. And our correct answer over there will be C. Right? It's very incorrect. It's going to be B. So, disadvantage. That's what we need to have a look at. Let me just wipe that out. So the correct answer will be B. Now, obviously, with the influx of people arriving in our urban areas, right, crime can increase as well as pollution. Now, unfortunately, right, the biggest pull factor for people moving to urban areas is going to be job opportunities. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people might not find an ideal job, and obviously, if we look at pollution, right, if we look at congestion taking place, right, traffic taking place, so that will be a disadvantage for urbanization taking place over time. So the correct answer for 1.2.6 will be B. Crime and pollution will be increasing. If we continue to our second last question, on 1.2.7, in 2022, the world population was 4.52 billion compared to 3.43 billion in the rural population. So, what is this? This is the A, level of urbanization taking place. And that's a trend all over the world, right? That there's fewer and fewer people staying in rural settlements, and the majority of the people are moving to urban settlements. So the correct answer for 1.2.7 is going to be A. It's the level of urbanization that takes place over time. Our last question with the short answer questions. Now, there's an infographic being provided to us over here. The project increase of 3.4 from 2018 to 2024 is known as C. As you can see, there's an increase of people living in urban areas. As you can see, there's a clear increase from 2018, it was 42.5%, up until 2025 to 45.9%. And that's the rate of urbanization taking place from people moving from the rural areas to our urban areas. So the correct answer for 1.2.8 will be C, the rate of urbanization. Now, that was our short question answers, right? Very importantly that you need to remember your concepts and your definitions to be able to answer these questions. Now, with our next type of questions, it's more the longer type of questions with the infographic and case studies that's being provided to you. Now, in this case, we have an extract and photographs based on urban renewal. Now, when we look at urban renewal over here, they've mentioned Johannesburg CBD. Now, once again, when we look at settlement and we discussed the urban settlements, right, and let's use Johannesburg as example, right, we can divide our urban areas in different areas. Like, for instance, the CBD is a central business district. Now, there's some classifications as well, are different income groups, high income, middle income, low income areas. We also have a rural urban fringe that's on the outskirts, and we also have a zone of decay that's situated just around the CBD. But let's look at the information that's been given to us. the heart of Johannesburg, right? According to the Centre of Development and Enterprise, 70% of South Africa's population will be urbanized. That's quite an interesting stat if you look at it over there. So that means we're going to have a massive influx of people moving from rural areas to urban areas. Now, to keep this in mind, why does this happen? Job opportunities, tertiary education, right? The push factors might be because of droughts, right? Because of floods, farms being mechanized, etc. Right? Now, they've mentioned the CBD of Johannesburg is no exception. It's characterized by potholes, dilapidated and hijacked buildings, pollutions and crime that drives investors and businesses away. Regardless of these conditions, they've already invested 800 million into the CBD. Now, we have seen this happening in Johannesburg, for example, right? That's just the current situation in Joburg CBD, the Central Business District. So we got outlying business districts such as Sandton that they developed over the last 2 decades. Because it's just simply because of the traffic congestion, dilapidated buildings. We know we got many hijacked buildings in the area, and because of the amount of crime that we experience in Joburg CBD, that many of the businesses have taken their business somewhere else, like for instance, Sandton. That's an outlying business district. Now, when we have a look at it, the new development of the dilapidated 6 blocks of Fox Street is to host a pristine jewel city, right? So it's basically they try to revigorate it, right? To renew it by creating residential units, also office space, popular retailers, fast food outlets, and essential services. So what they're trying to do is they want to recreate the area, try to improve it, urban renewal, for example, right? Try to attract more people back to the Central Business District of Johannesburg by investing money in low-cost housing, for example, as well as retail space, just to flower the place up, to make it more incentivized for people to go there. Now, let's have a look at the questions that's being asked. First and foremost, as you can see, this is what's being planned. This is the current situation in the Joburg CBD area, right? And this is the idea with constructing new buildings and new retail space for the Johannesburg areas. And as you can see, there's a welcoming public space where green belts will be created, CCTV cameras, especially for safety, in Johannesburg CBD as well. Now let's have a look at the questions that's being asked. If you refer to the extract and explain what could have led to urban blight of Johannesburg CBD. So that's basically, we can also mention it, that's the urban decay that took place, right, in the Joburg CBD, right? Now, refer to the extract and explain what could have led to the urban blight of Johannesburg. Now, first and foremost, they've mentioned crime. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong question over this. Write the acronym CBD in full. Question 1.3.1. That is known as the Central Business District. Now, if we have a look at question 1.3.2, describe 2 characteristics of the CBD evidence. All right. Now, when we look at the CBD, it's definitely the tallest buildings. So they've asked us to look at evidence on the photo, but I'm going to add a couple of more characteristics. It's the tallest buildings, and it's the highest building density. Now, if we go back in the history of CBD, Central Business Districts, we will always see this mostly, when you look at the Central Business District, it's the most accessible part of the urban area. Major roads leads to it. So let's take, for instance, Johannesburg as an example. We have the M2, N1, and the N3 that will all lead to this Joburg Central Business District. And the reasons why we have such dense buildings and tallest buildings, because it was the property, the stance, the price of it. It was the most expensive area in our urban areas. So the cost of land was extremely expensive, and that's the reason we have the high-rise buildings developing over time. If we follow our next question, 1.3.3, refer to the extract explaining what had led to urban blight of the Johannesburg CBC, right? And the correct answer will be, right, the high rate of urbanization. So I've mentioned that before in the previous question. The rate of urbanization has taken place so quickly that it created a lot of pressure and demand on local service delivery and the infrastructure itself, because there was a massive influx of people moving from the rural areas to the urban areas. Now that creates demand, and eventually that will create pressure on our local resources. And that's the reason we can see the decay in our Johannesburg Central Business District. If we continue to our next question, which term concept best describe the process of change as shown in photos A to B? Now, when we go back to that photos, first and foremost, if we look at photograph A, you can see a dilapidated buildings, zone of almost this decaying, right? It looks extremely rough. If you look at B, right, new buildings, new office parks, even green belts being created, covered with CCTV, right, creating a safe environment. Now, the correct concept to be used over there is known as gentrification. Now, the problem with gentrification, it's always a good thing because obviously we're trying urban renewal, right? Making the place look better. Obviously, we want to increase retail and we want to develop a safe area in these central business districts. But the problem that we experience with gentrification, what do we do with the people that was there before? Now, unfortunately, right, many of those people live in the Joburg CBD in the central business district to be close to their employment opportunities. But when this happens, what do we do with the people that used to settle over there? Right now, if you think of informal settlements, that's usually on the outskirts of our urban areas. That means travel costs is going to increase. Obviously, informal settlements lacks basic needs and services. So that's the problems that we experience with gentrification. Yes, it's always welcoming, right? Making the place looks much better, creating economic opportunities. But what do we do with the placement of the people that used to be there? And that's a question that we need to ask ourselves and how to address it correctly. Now, if you look at question 1.3.5, in a paragraph of 8 lines, explain the positive impact of process on the CBD of Johannesburg. Now, first and foremost, we looked at it. It's new buildings, right? We're going to invite new retail businesses. We're going to create residential areas. Now, obviously, first and foremost, we're going to improve the infrastructure, right? That's probably the most important one. And when I say we're going to improve the infrastructure, right, we're talking water, electricity, safety of these buildings. Now, first and foremost, it's going to be attractive because it means there's going to be new investments. And when new investments are being made, it means more job opportunities are being created by these investments, right? It's like a multiplier effect. So obviously people see it, right? People will throw money at it, right? Invest in it, creating more employment opportunities in the area. We can also add improved safety and crime, reduces crime, especially with the CCTV cameras. Improves safety and reduces crime. And especially with the slack, what happened with Johannesburg CBD, it will it will definitely, property values will increase. And lastly, like I've mentioned a couple of times, more employment opportunities. We're just quickly going to take a short break. Don't go anywhere. See you in a bit.
Did you know that bats are the only mammals that can fly? Other mammals are said to fly, flying squirrels for example, but in each case they are actually only gliding. The bat is the only mammal that achieves true flight. Bats do not flap their entire forelimbs as birds do. Instead, they flap their spread out digits, which are covered with a thin membrane.
Want to catch up on some of your studies? Join Mindset for late night studies. Monday is mathematics, Tuesday is physical sciences, with life sciences on Wednesday and accounting on Thursday. Friday is English, maths literacy on Saturday, and Sunday's a good day to catch up on geography. Every day from 9 p.m. till midnight, and again from midnight till 6 a.m. Late night studies, only on Mindset.
Welcome back. Once again, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you, Liberty, for this opportunity. And then, once again, on your smartphone, go and follow the Tenfold Education app. Lots of goodies on there that will definitely help you with your exam preparation. And give us a follow and a like on YouTube at Mindset Learn, where we do constantly revision on previous episodes. Now, I would like to continue with our question paper 2 for geography, and we're going to have a look at informal settlements. Right, informal settlements has got to do with the topic of settlement geography, and obviously we have many informal settlements and problems that arise because of this. In this case, there's a case study regarding informal settlements in the Western Cape. Now, first and foremost, they've mentioned that storms have wreaked havoc over the past few days. Now this usually happens in winter in the Western Cape because when we looked at it, climate, when we discussed mid-latitude cyclones, especially the Western Cape, are prone for mid-latitude cyclones during winter months, creating excessive amount of rainfall and strong winds as well. Now the problem we have with informal settlements, right, it's if you look at the conditions, how they've been built, right, it's not according to rules and regulations. And the majority of the time, it's not a legal settlement. But let's just go back to our case study and see what they've given to us over there. As you can see, the storms have wreaked havoc over the past few days in Cape Town, leaving a trail of destruction and thousands homeland, right? As you can see, Nyanga was the informal settlement. There was fires because of the gales force winds, probably because of the mid-latitude cyclones. And as you can see, almost 250 shacks have been destroyed, leaving roughly 1,000 people homeless. Now, one of the residents said, "I do not think the government cares as we still stay in shacks. And this is not for the first time we've been affected by fires. I lost of all my belongings, and I do not know how I'm going to recover since I'm unemployed." Now, this is the case with informal settlements in South Africa. It's people looking for brighter opportunities in our urban areas. But eventually, they come up short, right? And eventually that will lead to people moving to these informal settlements, usually in the outskirts of cities, and try to create a residential area for themselves. But if we look at our first question, as you can see on the infographic, you can see highly dense, right? If you look at the type of material that's being used. And obviously the aftermath of the fires because of the gale force winds that was experienced. Now, very importantly, we need to understand the concept of an informal settlement. And the correct concept is very simple. It's an unplanned residential area. Of self-built dwellings. And the majority of the time, right, it is illegally constructed. And immediately what you need to notice when we look at informal settlements, it lacks basic needs and services. We're talking sewage, we're talking electricity, we're talking infrastructure such as roads. And even if you look at the material being used to build these dwellings, right? It's usually cheap material, whatever they can find to construct like a dwelling for themselves. And obviously it's high risk involved, especially when we look at natural disasters such as floods, strong gale force winds, because they can't sustain these natural disasters, leaving lots of people homeless. Now, if we look at our next question, from the case study, how many shacks according to the source were burned down, we can just go straight back. I think I've underlined it, as you can see, 250 shacks, and we saw that over 1,000 people were homeless because of that. So the correct answer for 1.4.2 was 250 of them were burned down. Suggest measures that the government of the Western Cape can implement to assist households in the informal settlements. Now, first and foremost, the most important one is improve the infrastructure. Use stronger building material, rules and regulations. Now, especially like I've mentioned in our previous question, when we look at the CBD, right? When we look at our urban structures, you usually find our low-income residential areas closest to the CBD. So maybe the Western Cape government can improve infrastructure close to the CBD. So we can make new investments closest to the CBD. Sorry, just want to wipe this out. new investments closer to the CBD, like low-income residential areas, right? And we can also, what we can do is, right, create drainage, especially stormwater drainage, and build formal houses such as RDP houses. Now, when I say infrastructure, that can come down to electricity and sanitation. I think I skipped a question. I just want to continue quickly back up. All right. Now, if we quickly look at question 1.4.3, quote evidence from the extract to show the destruction caused by the fires in the informal settlement. Now, we've mentioned before, it was 250 shacks that was destroyed. And how many people were homeless? 1,000 people. If we continue to question 1.4.4, explain why informal settlements are vulnerable to storms and fires in the Western Cape. Right, we've mentioned it. It's the material, weak material that they use. We can also mention the density of the shacks. They're built very close together. And lastly, we can also add, right, they use flammable material. Now, unfortunately, these people rely on wood, for example, to create warmth, especially during what's called winter months, because many of these informal settlements lack infrastructure such as electricity, right, to keep them warm during these cold winter nights. Now, we looked at question 1.4.5, which we discussed. I'm just going to continue with our next questions. Now, our next topic, so this is the type of questions that you might have experienced, what you're going to experience with our settlement geography. Our next topic that we focus on is economic geography. Now, when we look at economic geography, we look at our 4 different economic activities that take place, and we're going to focus on some industrial regions that creates an economic hub for a lot of people in South Africa. Now, once again, question starts out with short answer questions where you need to know your definitions and your concepts. Now, if you look at question 2.1, once again, choose the correct word from the brackets given. Now, if we look at 2.1.1, extraction of raw materials from their natural environment is going to be a primary or secondary activity. And the correct answer is going to be a primary activity. Now, we've looked at it, right? When we look at primary activities, we focus on farming, fishing, forestry, and mining. The extraction of the raw materials is unifunctional. It's one main activity. So the correct answer for 2.1.1 is going to be primary activities. Now, if you look at question 2.1.2, foreign trade or international trade is the exchange of goods and services between countries. And the correct answer is foreign trade, right? So it means what we always want to do when we look at economic geography, we want to have a positive trade balance. It's always better for a country to export more than to import, right? Especially if you look at currency, the rand against the dollar. So what we want to do is we want to export more than we import. And even we can go a little bit further. What South Africa needs to focus on, especially for future generations, what we need to do, we have plenty of raw materials. But what we need to do in this country, we need to process those raw materials in a final product and eventually sell it to other countries, right? Unfortunately, in South Africa, we lack in the secondary department, secondary activities, where we process and manufacture goods to a final product. So it's almost like we're selling our raw materials for 10 rand and we ship it off to other countries, like China, for example. They take that raw material, right? They process it and we buy it back for 20 rand or 30 rand, even more, right? It's going to reduce costs. So that's what we need to do. So trade is where it happens. So we are exporting and importing goods to be able to be more profitable. So the correct answer for 2.1.2 is foreign trade. We trade with different countries. Now 2.1.3, the value added to raw material through processing. What is that known? It's beneficiation or the multiplier effect. And the correct answer is beneficiation, like I've just mentioned. So we need to add value to that raw material, right? Final product. Now the multiplier effect is completely different. That's what we see usually with mining towns. That eventually happens. Now, for instance, I'm going to use Rustenburg when platinum was discovered in the early 2000s. Now, obviously, it had a massive multiplier effect because obviously platinum was discovered, all the mines were ready to basically mine the platinum, and there was a massive influx of people, retail shops, right? We're talking about garages, service deliveries such as doctors, schools are being built, right? New services are being enabled because of the discovery or the mining of platinum, and that is known as the multiplier effect. So in this case, 2.1.3 is beneficiation that we experience over there when we process our raw material. Okay, if you look at question 2.1.4, quaternary or tertiary sector deals with information, collection, analysis and transformation. That's quaternary. Now immediately, if you think of tertiary activity, think of service delivery. Okay, so that will be the correct answer for 2.1.4. If we continue with our short answer questions, goods and services that are brought into the country is known as imports. Okay, like I've mentioned to you before, we should really focus on exporting more than importing. Okay, so that will give us a much better GDP, gross domestic product, and that's how our country becomes more wealthier. If you look at question 2.1.6, there are two of those acronyms that you need to know for tomorrow's exam, SDI and IDZ. Now SDI, what does it stand for? It stands for Spatial Development Initiative. And the IDZ stands for Industrial Development Zone. So the question is a government program to encourage investment and job creation in areas with high growth potential? And the correct answer over there will be SDIs. Now, very importantly, what we do over there, I'm quickly going to differentiate between Spatial Development Initiative and Industrial Development Zones. Let's start with Industrial Development Zones. We have four major industrial development zones in Southern Africa, South Africa. You need to know PWV, Pretoria Witwatersrandvereniging. We have the Durban Pinetown Industrial Area. We have Port Elizabeth Uitenhage, and we have the Southwestern Cape. These are four major industrial hubs where processing and manufacturing is taking place, right? Especially when we look at PwC, we look at refinement of metal, steel, coal, etc. when we move down to Durban Pinetown and we look at the sugarcane industry, where the sugarcane is being processed into raw sugar and being exported to other countries. And because of the Durban Harbour and the Richards Bay Harbour that consist of exporting coal. So these are major industrial regions. We want more of them because what do? They create job opportunities. We have the multiplier effect taking place over there, right? If more of our raw material being processed, right, and being manufactured, it means we create more job opportunities and we're gonna need more services in these areas. Now with our SDIs, our spatial development initiatives, now between our industrial regions, we want to create growth between these areas. Now a perfect example is the Maputo corridor, for example. The Maputo corridor is the N4 highway that was constructed between PWV and Maputo. So along this corridor next to the N4, what we're trying to do, we're trying to develop these underdeveloping rural areas to being exposed to the trade that takes place between the PWV and Maputo Harbour and give access to more underdeveloped places, right? For instance, if you look at Nelspruit, beautiful city, right? And giving access to tourist hotspots such as the Kruger National Park. Now, very importantly, this Maputo corridor, this spatial development initiative, it promotes trade between us and Mozambique. It promotes tourism between us and Mozambique, right? And it gives opportunity to these underdeveloped rural areas along this corridor to develop, to create new opportunities for themselves. So that's the difference between our SDIs and IDZs, right? The two that we need to focus on is PWV and Durban Pinetown, and then obviously the Maputo corridor as well. If we continue with our next question, 2.1.7, industrial decentralization. Industrial centralization is the over-concentration of industries in a few core areas. And that correct answer is industrial centralization. Now, unfortunately, this is a very sensitive topic when it comes to industrial decentralization because no business owner in his clear mind will just completely close his factory and move to a different area because the cost involved will be absolutely humongous. But especially in the PWV that we experience, right, we have extremely many industrial companies situated, centralized altogether. And obviously problems that might occur, like pollution that we experience. And whereas some areas in South Africa lacks this industrial centralization or infrastructure to create more job opportunities somewhere else. Now that was our short answers, one of the short answer questions. Once again, if we look at our next questions, choose the correct answer. Now if you look at question 2.2.1, the largest industrial region in South Africa, I've mentioned a little bit earlier, is the PWV region, Gauteng, right? There's our four major industrial regions in Southern Africa. Now, as you can see, 2.2.2, the activity dominant in Durban Pinetown industrial region, that will be sugarcane refinery, because, right, if you look at Durban Pinetown, it's a very good climate to be able to farm the sugarcane industry. We are very situated, very close to the harbour to be able to export the final product. And then also, just have to mention, it's not the biggest, but motor car assembly, for instance, Toyota is found on the coast of Durban, right? And there is a positive skilled and unskilled labour force. But for this answer over here, C will be the correct answer. Just in case winemaking, we will see that in the Southwestern Cape region, not in Durban Pinetown. Question 2.2.3, the physical factor influencing the location of Durban Pinetown, right, is definitely going to be the harbour that makes it more accessible to the international market, to export our goods to other countries, right, once they are being processed, and obviously, once again, the importing of goods from other countries that we might need. So 2.2.3, the correct answer will be the harbour, and the correct answer is B. Now, 2.2.4, the only core industrial regions that is landlocked, and that will be PWV, the biggest one. Now, as you can see, B, C, and D, Durban Pinetown, situated on the coast of KwaZulu-Natal, Southwestern Cape, the area of Cape Town, and Port Elizabeth, Uitenhage, we find in the Eastern Cape. So the correct answer, meaning landlocked, will be the PWV. If we look at our next question, 2.2.5, two types of industries associated with bulk transport. Well, I've mentioned you be cautious, heavy, light, and raw material orientated. I can guarantee you our heavy industries has got to do with bulk transport, and then lastly, our raw material orientated. So the correct answer will be 2 and 4. So the correct answer will be B. Grade 12s, unfortunately we're running out of time. I hope some of these questions definitely help you with your preparation for tomorrow. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next time.